What's up, everybody? Peter Ariz here alongside D Money, and today we're doing our basketball season preview. You see the hat right here, the Final Four hat from a couple years ago. Went Elite Eight the year before that, and then really terrible season last year. One of the worst teams in the ACC. D finished the season with a 10-game losing streak. But Coach Larrañaga has completely retooled this roster. 9 new players on the team this season. Going to have a really different look on both sides of the court here. And we're going to take you guys through the roster. D and I had a chance to go to practice last week, a couple weeks ago, and got an up-close look at some of these guys. Had the exhibition game last week, was in attendance for that one as well, and then starting the season tonight with Fairleigh Dickinson. So really excited about this year. But D, like I said, new look roster, new look team, and Coach Larrañaga's had this happen a couple times in his career. Have really high highs, then seasons after that weren't great, but it always seems like he's been able to retool and kind of rebuild from the ground up.
Yeah, when you count him out, that's usually when he does the best. As far as his coaching career with the University of Miami, like you said, has been ups and downs, obviously more ups and downs. He's the best coach we ever had. But off those downs is oftentimes when he does his best work, including the most recent run. Think about what preceded that run and how quickly it turned around. I'm just excited to see new veterans, meaning guys that are older players that we haven't seen yet. Of course, the Lynn kids of the world, Staten, McCray, Jalen Blackman, then our own veterans, which aren't a ton, but Nigel Pack, someone that we've grown to know and love. Matthew Cleveland, transfers themselves, but guys that have been around the block here with the Hurricanes. And then the young talent. So it's not just only young guys, only new veterans, only returning veterans. It's a mix. The young talent, obviously Jaleel Bethea, we know what he can do. And Schwartz and Johnson Arugu, guys that we were excited about. Man, there's more young talent maybe than we thought. This staff is showing that they can evaluate diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, and historically, you look at the great Miami teams, and you've always had a mix of Shane Larkin was a sophomore when he went on the run and was the ACC Player of the Year, but you had a Durant Scott who was ACC Defensive Player of the Year as a senior. You had a Kenny Kaji. You had Reggie Johnson, Julian Gamble were 5th, 6th year guys, veterans who had been around. Trey McKinney-Jones as a transfer piece. But then you had the Ryan Browns, who was a young player on those teams. You had the Shane Larkin, who was the catalyst. But same thing a few years ago in these deep runs you made with a Jordan Miller, obviously Isaiah Wong, who was ACC Player of the Year and had been around. But Wooga Poplar was a big part of that run. Obviously, he's a guy we'll talk about here who's no longer with the program anymore, now at Villanova. But you look at the way the roster is constructed, and a lot of guys who have played a lot of basketball. Lynn Kidd at center, who we'll get into in more depth. 6th year, has played at Clemson, Virginia Tech, and now Miami. So he's familiar with everyone in the ACC. But you saw this team, the injuries last year were obviously a huge part of it. They found ways to lose games, right? And when they did go up in certain situations, they couldn't stabilize, they couldn't hold on to leads, they weren't able to claw back and find wins when they weren't necessarily playing their best basketball. But you should be able to come out in a lot of these close games at a better clip than last year, just on the fact that you have a lot of guys who have played.
And the versatility of the scoring. Jalen Blackman, we're talking about whether he's going to start or not start. This guy was one of the top scorers in the country last year, played in the NCAA tournament against UConn for Stetson. So it's a very interesting mix of players. The shooting, I thought, in the exhibition and the practice we went to was very obvious, the variety of shooting all across the board. Then you couple that with a Lynn Kidd, who's a pure inside scorer that Miami has not had since, how far back do we go? I know Jakiri was an okay inside scorer, but this kid's level of skill.
But you weren't throwing it into Jakiri and just maybe to keep the flow of the offense going, but you weren't throwing it into him expecting him to score. It was evident in the exhibition game against St. Leo last week. Throwing it into Lynn Kidd and letting him manufacture some points on the low post, drawing double teams and facilitating out of that's going to be a big part of the offense, and again, we'll get into the departures and guys who have come in to replace some of the guys who have left. But the way that the style of the game that's going to be played this year is going to be a lot different than what we've seen in the last couple of years, because you've played really a lot of small ball, and you'll still have to do that at portions this year. But I think that's going to be a big difference in terms of the style of how they play.
Yeah, and you look at Link Kidd, just starting with him because he's such a different player. So again, surrounded by shooters, and we'll get to all the different individual shooters, which should free up room for him. 13 points last year for Virginia Tech, probably the most improved player in the conference. 67% from the field, 84% from the line. So that level of efficiency inside is just highly unusual. Usually you get one or the other, right? A great free throw shooter is going to play more away from the basket. Guy who plays great at the rim is going to be, someone you want to foul because he's not a good shooter. It's how many guys can you really say are elite at the basket as an interior scorer and a free throw shooter? Very unique, and he's going to have space to operate because of the great shooters. Also, one thing that really jumped to me about Lynn Kidd, watching Virginia Tech and really studying his games once he committed to Miami, and you could really dive in on him. He's very, very good at transition. He's not your heavy-footed, like a Reggie Johnson type who's going to live in the post, but he's not going to run the floor. He does have that post game, but he can run the floor as well. So offensively, Lynn Kidd, really, really exciting player as a fit in this offense and a different look. Of course, as we'll get into, Pete, the defensive end overall, I think, is where the questions with this team are going to come in.
Yeah, and with Kidd, I think the fact that he's such a good free throw shooter, he's going to get fouled. That's, 84, 85% last year from the line. So to me, that's a huge part of what he brings, because those are just easy points that he's going to get. And we saw him against St. Leo, a little bit of a slow start in the first half, 4 points, and then ended up scoring 16 in the game, so 12 in the second half there. But just his sheer size, he's up near 240 pounds. He told me when I interviewed him at Media Day. So he's put on some good weight. He said that was a part of his game that he really felt like he needed to add. And you pair him with a guy in Brandon Johnson, who comes over from East Carolina. And he's an interesting one, D, because everything we're hearing about him in terms of the stuff that Coach Al is saying, and he doesn't hide much in the media, I think there's a chance that Brandon Johnson ends up being game in, game out, Miami's most consistent and important player this season. But everything we saw from him, it seemed like, coming from East Carolina, the highlights were all deep threes, showing his range. But we had a chance to see him in person, and then we saw him in the exhibition as well. He's another guy who has the ability to score around the basket, around the paint, can shoot at the mid-range jumper, can finish around the rim a little bit. But he's big, man, and really liked what I saw from a rebounding perspective from him the other day as well.
Yeah, he was big in person. Your classic late bloomer, just looking at his career, getting to East Carolina and then to Miami. I mean, he was a late bloomer, like, before East Carolina. It's not like he was a great get for them out of high school. He was really someone that no one expected to be what he is. Obviously, ended up a very good player for Eastern Carolina last year, 14 points, put up a ton of threes. He was shooting 5.7 per game and still hitting at a good clip, 36.5%, and a lot of high distance threes. I mean, he was pulling up from very far away. We saw that in practice. He's someone who I think is going to be a high volume 3-point shooter for the Canes. Maybe not as much because there's other good shooters, but he's still going to put it up when he's open and have that green light. But the size is going to be needed. Really, and we'll talk about Cleveland in a second, but having a true 6'8", pushing 6'9" long guy next to a true 6'11", almost 7-footer in Kidd, now you're starting to look the part, and you put Cleveland in there more as a natural small forward as opposed to playing as a power forward more than he'd like to. The whole front court has size without sacrificing offensive game.
Yeah, you're playing a guy in Johnson who is more of a stretch four, where you had Norchad Omier, which we obviously were huge fans of Norchad Omier's game, but at the end of the day, you were relying on a guy who was 6'6", 6'7" as your starting five without much behind him either, right? So it's not like he was spelling and playing a few minutes a game here or there at the five, but the dynamic of the offense is completely different. Matthew Cleveland being another guy who everything that the guys were telling me at the media day was that he's been shooting the ball at a very, very high level. And he averaged 14 points a game, 7.5 rebounds last season. But I think there's a lot more that we could see from him this year, playing again in a role now where he'll probably have a little bit more of the ability to do what he wants at that 3 spot.
And P, from our conversations last year, I thought Matthew Cleveland got a little too much criticism for what was a disappointing season. So, when this is a bad season like that, him being a new guy, replacing Jordan Miller, who's an NBA player, there's going to be some pressure and some criticism when things don't go right. When you look at the stats that he put up, very similar to what he did at Florida State the year before when everybody wanted him out of the portal. 13.7 points, like you mentioned, 6.1 total rebounds. He did shoot 3 threes a game, 35.7%. So he was making them 48.9% from the field. So he was doing a nice job finishing. I think people just expected him to maybe take more of an offensive initiator role like Jordan Miller had. And they're different types of players. Team like this, where Cleveland is not being relied on for his size as much. He's also not being relied on to create as much because of what you have now at the guard position. So he can kind of just be Matthew Cleveland and fit in where he fits in. There's a highly ranked player entering his 4th year of college, NBA ready body, very good athlete, can shoot, can slash, can play defense, can rebound. I think he's going to be, of all the guys on the team, I think the guy that's going to maybe change their perception of who they are the most is going to be Cleveland. I think in this role, he is going to be able to show that he really is a good player. There's a reason why NBA's had their eyes on him as somebody who athletically, skill-wise, has a chance to make it in that league body-wise. It's just a better situation for him to be who he needs to be. We didn't see him in the exhibition game. We'll see if we see him tonight. There's been mixed reports on that. But I think once you see him paired with Johnson and with Kidd, it's going to be a very big-looking front court, and he's going to be able to just be more of a complementary player, but a very effective complementary player.
Yeah, when we went to practice, Cleveland didn't practice that day either, but Coach O was optimistic the other day after the game against St. Leo, saying that he would probably be back to practice the day after the game last week. So hopefully he is healthy. And AJ Staten McCray, a guy who comes over from Samford, was someone who started in his spot, but I think is going to be getting starter type minutes on this team with the defense that he could bring to the perimeter. We'll get into his game a little bit more in a second, but just rounding out the potential top starting 5 here. Nigel Pack at point guard, obviously someone who was a big part of the Final Four run, one of the best shooters in the country. I think that very tough year for him last year. I don't think that people realize that, how nicked up he was. He was really injured. Coach Els talked about it a lot this offseason and said one of the byproducts of him having to rehab and strengthen is that he's gotten more explosive. He's gotten stronger, because a lot of the stuff was with his lower body in terms of the rehab. So he says, obviously, we know the sort of shooter he is, but Coach L feels like he's more explosive and is going to be able to get into the lane and facilitate a little bit more this season. So I think huge bounce back year for Nigel Pack.
Yeah, I think just looking at the numbers last year, so he's played 4 years of college basketball basically as a starter. I mean, this guy has 112 starts in college, which is crazy. As for a guy that's going to have a whole nother season, I mean, if he stay healthy, knock on wood, his total starts number is going to be just off the charts because of the transfer rules and the fact he's had basically 5 full seasons as a starter. But when you look at it, last year was his lowest year in terms of attempts, 5.6. So it's not like he had a larger 3-point shooting role. In fact, he had a lesser 3-point shooting role than he has at any point in his career, including true freshman. But it was also by far his lowest percentage. He was 35.7%. Every other year, including his true freshman year, he was over 40% on more attempts. So, and free throw, same thing. Lowest free throw percentage year of his career. I don't think that Nigel Pack became a worse shooter last year. He's been shooting pretty well since he got into college, shooting very well since he got into college. He works hard. It's not like the volume went up and that's why his percentages went down. The volume actually went down. So the only explanation to me is he was hurt and the offense just wasn't operating on all cylinders around him. So his attempts weren't as high of a quality. I agree with you, Pete. Just looking at the numbers, seeing how he played against St. Leo, the ability to play off guys, the fact that he doesn't have all the pressure to be the guy creating for everybody. I do see a bounce back season for Nigel Pack where he gets that 3-point percentage over 40, gets that free throw percentage over 80, and makes a ton of big shots like he has in his Miami career.
You mentioned the fact that he's started over 100 games in his career. I mean, look, it's kind of like the Cam Ward effect we see at that position for quarterback, how much the experience comes into play and how it seems like the game is so slow for him. Charlie Moore as Miami's point guard a few years ago, played at 4 different schools along the way. And I think it's a similar situation there. Angel Rodriguez was a guy who, those Miami teams, made Sweet 16 runs with him at point guard. So I think the game slows down for him a lot. And then I'm not going to discount the added strength and athleticism that Coach O has talked about, because once he hits a few shots early in a game, it really changes the way that teams have to defend him. And I think it opens up a lot for this offense. So moving along here as we just keep going down the roster, and we'll get into some other stuff like big picture things. We'll take a look at the schedule, the way that it shakes out for Miami as well.
Before we get to the bench, which is going to be
it's not the bench.
Or not even the bench. All right, let's go. This is the interesting part, right? Because this is where the rubber's going to hit the road, and we'll see how this position shakes out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so Jalen Blackman, who started the first game or the exhibition game, and in practice he was out there with the starters as well. So he's a guy who comes over as the 14th leading scorer in the country from Stetson, can really shoot the 3-point ball. Again, you get talking to these guys in media day, and couple guys said, look, when Nigel and Jalen get hot out there, it's very, very difficult to defend, right? Because you have two guys who can really shoot from distance, can stretch the perimeter defense, and that opens up stuff for then. Again, you get that inside-outside game working like we were talking about with Kidd and Johnson as well. Then you can really attack teams in different ways. You could really only beat teams one or two ways, previously. But Jalen Blackman, a guy who can shoot it, not the biggest guy in the world. So I think defensively, Coach O has said it. He's a little bit concerned, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen when Miami has to play some of these teams with bigger guards, with NBA type talent, like they're going to have with Arkansas and Coach Cal coming to town. And then obviously when you get into ACC play too. But that duo will be interesting to watch, because of course, who is the first guy off the bench and made an immediate impact his first 3 possessions, Jalil Bethea, highest ranked recruit in Canes hoops history. D, you had a chance to interview him on Storm Sessions. Top 5, top 10 type NFL, NBA pick potentially. And if you're Coach L, you don't really rely on freshmen too often, but you have a talent this special, and I would think that he gets worked into that mix pretty early there.
Yeah, so this is the position that I'm watching just to see who starts. I think both these guys are going to play a ton, but this to me is so interesting. You also have AJ State and McCray, who could potentially fit into starters, started the exhibition game with Cleveland out. So starting with Blackman, I think the number that jumps out to me is, if you look at the last 2 seasons, 91% from the line, 90.7 from the line. What that tells me is this is a pure shooter. When you get to that 90 range from the line, you are an elite shooter. And of course, he makes 3 attempts. So he's putting it up a lot. Obviously, the team relied on him. He was averaging 21 points a game as a tournament team at Stetson. But that pure shooting ability, I think, with him is unlike we've had at Miami since, who was the last? Pack's a really, really good shooter. Probably a better
Jack
scorer.
McClinton. Jack McClinton.
Go back to McClinton, right?
Who I don't know if he still has it, but at one point had the best free throw shooting percentage in ACC history. Had beaten JJ Redick out for that one. So I don't know if he still has that, but
yeah, DJ was a pretty good shooter also.
Yeah, DJ Vasiljevic.
Yeah, just looking at DJ stats. DJ was a 91%, 88% career from the line. So McClinton, DJ, those are the pure shooters we're kind of talking about here. I'd put Blackman in that class, but then you're watching the clips of Bethea there. He's another great shooter, but also has the other stuff, right? The explosiveness. He's won high school dunk contest. I interviewed him for Storm Sessions. Check it out if you haven't. That was a lot of fun from the official UM channel. Really polished kid for a young freshman. You could tell he's comfortable being around the camera. Just a really nice, easy to like young man, smart, focused, really cares about basketball, loves basketball. He does all his TikTok stuff. You could tell basketball really is where his priorities are. And that first game, man, you were texting me during the game, just those first 3 buckets, particularly the third one when he finished with the left hand stepping through. That was high level stuff. McClinton was really buzzing on that call and said this guy's a one and done all day. So two I'll say very different players with Blackman and Bethea, but definitely way more experience on the Blackman side, way more athleticism, explosiveness on the Bethea side. Both of these guys can put up buckets in a hurry. What I'd like to see as the season goes forward is maybe a Bethea getting more towards the basket, just because he has that ability to burst and beat guys with his first step and doing it that way, where Blackman becoming more of a pure shooter, because Blackman can score, but you look at his 2-point percentage last year, 47%. That's not great when you compare it to a guy that is just so elite as a shooter. I think Blackman really, the more he can be a catch and shoot 3-point shooter who has that quick trigger and who has that bright green light when he's open from three, that's what you really want. You don't want him to have to be an Isaiah Wong that's creating off the dribble. You just kind of hand it to him and get him out the way. I think Bethea, even though he's not as old as Wong was when he had that Player of the Year season, he can give you some of those things with the ability to score at all three levels.
Yeah, no, Ryan Brown did a lot of that microwave score off the bench in some of those really good teams. And look, whether it's Blackman, whether it's Bethea, again, I think Bethea is going to work himself in as one of the top 2 or 3 players on this team when it's all said and done, because he's just that special. But I think Blackman's going to have a huge role and score a lot of points. And you hit 2 or 3 threes in a row and you get some real momentum going. And Miami just didn't have the shooting on this team last year, so you needed to add that 100%. AJ Staten-McCray, next guy I want to talk about, D, as I think, as we saw, he with Cleveland out the other day, he started, but coming over from Samford, a guy who played in the NCAA tournament, shot 41.3% from three last year, 11.5 points a game, length defensively. We know he has a background in tennis. We talked to him on the Canes Connection interview we did. 4.5 rebounds a game, 1.6 steals a game. So I think he's someone he could play a similar role. I keep going back to some of these great Canes teams because that's the blueprint under Larinaga. Maybe like a Trey McKinney-Jones who played that 3 spot in the starting lineup for Miami, but was a really, really consistent 3-point shooter from the corners and was a lockdown defender.
Yeah, and I think, look, we've been emphasizing the positives here, so people are probably listening like, hey, man, this team was terrible last year. You're not talking about any of the concerns. Are we going to win the championship? Defense is really the question here. So we went through Bethea, we went through Blackman, went through Nigel Pack. All 3 of those guys are going to be score-first type players. None of them known for their defense. Bethea's a freshman, so you don't really know what to expect, but I think the expectation is that's going to be a work in progress there. So, and Lynn Kidd, even though he's a 7-footer, also not really known for his defense. Brandon Johnson, we'll see there. Cleveland, I think that those 2 maybe could help you more on defense this year as their offensive role is not as expansive because of the guys around him, but, that's projection. Staten-McCray is a guy that comes in as a good defender. He likes to play defense. You mentioned the tennis background, the ability to move laterally. I liked his shooting in the exhibition game. His stats are good there. The shot looks good. I don't see any reason why he can't shoot well for this team. In a perfect world, if you weren't worried about ego and things like that, you might want to pair Staten-McCray with a Nigel Pack in the backcourt just to have 2 guys that complement each other, and you don't want to worry about having 2 offensive first guys that might be getting beat and putting too much pressure on your interior because they're getting blown by. That's going to be tricky because having Jalen Blackman and Bethea both on the bench just as tough. I mean, you're going to have a hard time just keeping one of those guys on the bench with Blackman scoring last year, Bethea's pedigree. So we'll see how that fits in throughout the course of a game with Staten-McCray most likely coming off the bench. And in closing time, if there's another guard on the other team that's really hurting you, does he close games? It's going to be very interesting to watch his use, but I think he's very, very much needed. And he's the one guy you look at and say, he has more, he's not just a role player because he can't do other things, but he can certainly come in and help you in a specific role that really helps your team win ball games because of his defense, because of his ability to catch and shoot the 3.
Now, talking about question marks on this team, D, as we continue to go down this roster, but to me, you mentioned defense, but it's really after Lynn Kidd, what do you have there in terms of an interior presence? I think Brandon Johnson's probably going to have to play some 5 at times this year. and maybe you slide a Cleveland to the 4, and you have a Joe Bay involved, who we'll get to now, and Staten McRae and some of these other guys. But Kyrie Huey comes in from Idaho State. He's going to be missing some time now. He had surgery, no timetable for his return. I would hope, because this would have been, the surgery happened 2-3 weeks ago now at this point, from the timetable that I understand. You would hope you could get him back for ACC play, obviously in January. But then once he gets back there, it's a whole assimilation process, working him into the rotation. So I am concerned about what you have there to spell Lynn Kidd and guys in the interior.
Yeah, I love the addition of Kyrie Huey, and like you said, I wish we had him for the 2024 calendar year. I don't know when he's coming back. He had the cast, didn't look like anything crazy, but I mean, it's a cast, and he's playing basketball, and it's on his hand. So,
and it's surgery. It's not a break and just a wait sort of thing. So that Coach L said that a couple of times, that he had surgery. So there's a more of a recovery and rehab process involved in that.
Right. So this, I think, is going to hurt Miami quite a bit, because there is that lack of depth. You lose Nwoko to Mississippi State.
Yeah.
So the interior depth is not where you want it to be. You're relying on guys that, just haven't produced at the college level, and you don't have a freshman coming in that's a true big man. So really, that's when you're going to go small ball more likely, when you go to the bench without Huey. But when you do have Huey, you have a true big man off the bench, lefty scorer. I thought his ability to get off the floor, when you watch his highlights at Idaho State, really, that's what jumped off to me, is that he gets off the floor quickly. He's got those nice lefty finishes. Strong body guy, was listed at 228 pounds. Seeing him in person, I think that checked out. He looked pretty big, Pete. Mm-hmm. So this is what we needed. It was a very good addition. Now it's just, when can we get him back? Because once Lynn Kidd's off the floor, there really is not another center on the roster right now that you can feel good about.
Yeah, there's still going to be a small ball element to this team, without a doubt. I think you look at a Paul Jobe, who I thought was very promising against St. Leo, way more confidence. I mentioned it the other day. It's a guy who grew up playing soccer, didn't move to the States until he was like 14 years old, and I did a lot of growing this offseason. Looks a lot stronger. I don't necessarily think that he went into last season thinking he would play the role that he ended up playing for that team, but we keep using the football references here. It's like a Markel Bell, man. He gets that experience, and it kind of accelerates his growth process a little bit. And I think that showing he had the other day against St. Leo, you can see that he's someone who's going to have a role in this team on the defensive side of the floor. Could be very involved in spelling some of the guys down there, playing the 4 and potentially 5 spots. Obviously you don't want, he's 6'7", so you'd ideally want someone bigger there. But again, there's gonna be a lot of mixing around with these rotations and figuring out what. And I think that's something different we're gonna see this year. There's a lot of young guys in the mix, a few more guys we have to get to. But Coach L said it the other day, is that since there's so much roster turnover, 9 new players, he has to play them to see what it looks like during game action. And that's, Coach L is not someone who likes to play too many guys in a rotation generally, right? I don't think the depth has been there, but I think he has trust issues with some of these young players, but I don't think he has an option this year. We're going to see it early on in the year here, because things ramp up quickly, but you have 5-6 games here before you get into the meat of your schedule.
Yeah, Pete, none of us were projecting Joe Bay to contribute last year like he did. He ended up starting a game and really surpassed expectations. Like you mentioned, this is a raw player. So sometimes with these raw players, newer to the game, of course, him coming from France, they develop at a faster rate when they're really there. France has become one of the top basketball countries in the world, probably number 2 to the United States. So we talked about on another show, you want to build that French pipeline. Keyshawn George, a Swiss national, played in France. Miami took that trip out there last year. So you like that development. But just speaking about Joe Bay in particular, he stood out in a major way to me during the exhibition game. We knew he could shoot. His shot looks even better. We saw it in practice too. His shot just looks good. Physically, he looks good. His effort, the little things. He's got strong hands, strong body. He's legit 6'7". a lot of that kind of stuff that you need on this roster that's going to be more skill based on the perimeter. He brings that with the length and the athleticism and the defense. But what jumped out to me, his drives looked really good. He
Yeah, I
was
agree.
slashing. I didn't know he had that element to him. You tell he's working hard. And then you say, well, look, what's the upside on him? We don't know. We don't know where this guy could be in 2 years, 3 years. He's progressing at the rate that you want to see. And I think, look, Cleveland was out. Stade McCray ended up starting. I'm not sure if when you really get into the season, Joe Bay is not the primary backup for Cleveland, Johnson, and Kidd. And when one of those guys goes out, he goes in. Maybe not to start, but certainly to finish, because he really is the only other guy besides those three that brings that kind of body type. We'll see what Isaiah Johnson Arrigo can do as the season goes on. But Joe Bay really has an important role because of his frame and because of his trajectory.
And he can rebound. That's something that Coach L said the other day about him when they asked about him. He said he's probably, after the big guys, our best rebounder on the team. And he did rebound well last year when he played. So that's a skill, and we've talked about it a lot. So I think he works his way onto the floor with defensive rebounding, but offensively, man, we're not saying he needs to be the best 3-point shooter in the country or anything like that. But if he has the confidence that he showed the other night, right, to knock down an open 3 in transition, to keep the ball moving within the flow of the offense, put it on the ground, get to the hoop, drive and dish, because you're going to have shooters around him. I'm excited about his upside, and I think he's a guy who he'll play 15 to 20 minutes a game on this team.
Yeah, look, last year 17 attempts from 3, but he made 7 of them, so 41%. Small sample, but they went in. And I, like you were saying, Pete, it just looks good. I mean, I might go ahead and make a prediction now about this team. One exhibition game in, and maybe I'll regret it after we watch the game today at the SCO. I think this could be one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. I mean, really, Pack, I would put him in the elite shooter category. I know the stats didn't show it last year, but if you ask people about Nigel Pack, the first thing they're going to say, this is one of the best 3-point shooters around. That was his rep coming in, and certainly he didn't disappoint going to the Final Four, hitting a lot of big threes. Jalen Blackman, you look at him. I mean, just the scoring production he had on a tournament team, the numbers, one of the best, in my view, shooters in the country. And you look at the shot, it looks great. Stade McCray can shoot threes. Cleveland can shoot threes. Brandon Johnson loves to shoot threes. And then Jaleel Bethea likes to shoot threes. If Schwartz comes in and plays, he's a 3-point shooter. Of course, we're talking about Joe Bay. I don't see why this wouldn't be one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country when you look at all the guys that they have and the fact that they're all going to have quick triggers and green lights, I think, from Coach Larinaga to shoot when they get open.
Yeah, well, I agree 100%. And we have a few more guys to talk about here before we kind of get into the way the schedule lays out and how Miami is kind of projected now nationally. But we've talked about some of these potential role players. Kyrie Huey, we touched on him. I think once he gets back, could potentially bring some really good energy to the floor for Miami. And look, at the end of the day, you get into ACC play, sometimes you need a guy to just come in there, eat up a couple fouls, grab some boards, and keep it moving. And he could end up being a big part of this Miami team in the middle of that ACC schedule, D.
No question. And that's another part of this is you're really with the way that the schedule works in college basketball, you really have 2 seasons, right? So much of this is going to be figuring out what you have. You have a totally new team. You don't really know who's going to do what and what the roles are going to play. You can project based on what you saw in camp, what you saw with them from last season, but you really don't know. So I wouldn't be surprised if the rotation looks different than what we're talking about here as you get into ACC play. Of course, injuries play a part, but I think that's one thing that jumps out to me is this is a brand new team. So just like the fans are learning, I think the coaching staff's learning a little bit as these guys go. And when you talk about true freshmen, guys that you need to see how they perform, who knows what you're going to get from all these guys.
Yeah, I think Yusuf Basa comes over from Yale the first 3 years. He's a guy who's on scholarship, and look, he scored a few buckets off nice dump downs by Divine Ugochukwu, the freshman who we'll talk about in a moment. But he's someone who in these early season games is going to play because he's got some size, and if he can show something, maybe he works himself into the mix there. But I think in the second unit we'll see a lot of small ball, especially early in the season here. Getting into some of these last young guys that we have, Isaiah Johnson Arigu, someone that impressed us in practice, didn't play the other day in the exhibition. And he wasn't announced as a guy who was hurt, so I was surprised about that. But physically looks the part, looks like a guy who's developing as a 3-point shooter, and was getting a lot of buzz out of Minnesota when he committed to Miami. Looks like a nice piece for the future.
Yeah, we watched him in practice, and that was the name that was kind of on our minds leaving the practice, just because he play. It's practice, so they're going against each other. But it seemed like he was maybe more embedded with the team than your usual freshman. He carried himself like he was a veteran. He's at 220 pounds, so he's already the same size on paper as Brandon Johnson, who's a starter. Aside from Kidd and Cleveland, he's just as big as anybody on the team. He was making threes and looked good when he shot the threes. Physically, again, we talked about he looked good. He was moving around well. So very excited to see what he brings. Wish we could have seen him in that opener against St. Leo. Maybe we'll see him today, kind of like with Cleveland. Two of your bigger guys did not play, right? So it was more of a guard-heavy look. I mean, everybody played, but it was more of a guard-heavy look against St. Leo. We haven't seen what this looks like with a Cleveland and potentially a Johnson Arrigo getting minutes. Those are your big wings. And then Joe Bay. So, I mentioned Joe Bay's kind of, you're really your only big body wing off the bench, but Johnson Arrigo could add his name to that category. And now you got more wing depth than you've had probably in a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Last year it was kind of Cleveland or bust. Wooga, I know he had the size as far as the length, but he didn't impose his way on the game like a big wing would do. He was much more of just your one-dimensional shooter. And then Joe Bay kind of came in later, but we really didn't have a backup big wing, right, to Cleveland last year.
Mm-hmm.
Norton O'Meara,
Joe Bay ended up being that.
Right. And that was something over the course of the year. I mean, obviously O'Meara is not built that much differently than the guys we're talking about, but he was your starting center. So
yeah, he had a few pounds on him, I think.
He did. He did. But listen, look, O'Meara was 240 probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Arrigo is not that, but it didn't look like two different body types. I mean, again, you're talking about a veteran O'Meara who's been a double guy and played bigger than even his size and had been in the weight room for many, many years. Arrigo's not, I don't know if he'll ever be as big as O'Meara or if he wants to be with his style of play, but it's not like we're talking about, Shaq and Muggsy Bogues. I mean, these guys, the body types aren't that dissimilar. And with a Cleveland who's also 6'7", strong body guy, Joe Bay we talked about, now you're getting bigger without just having Lynn Kidd at center. It's just the perimeter gets bigger as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens a lot of times in the ACC. You play some of these teams that just have so many guys who can score from the wing, and you don't have stoppers for that. But I think these guys that they've brought in should really help that issue. And it's interesting when they did. I don't know if you were there for this part of practice yet, D, but they were doing defensive drills and they split them up into the guards and then into the big guys. And they had Isaiah Johnson Arrigo with the big men, so working low post defense, moving the feet side to side. So it seems like they're prepping him for some sort of role there this season. A couple more freshmen here to get to at the guard spot. And I mean, look, what a heralded freshman class for Miami. We've talked about almost the whole roster, and then you have a couple guys here. Austin Swartz, we'll start with him, who was a top 70 ranked player in the country, a guy who's not afraid to shoot the basketball, can fill it up in a variety of ways. But Jalen Blackman told me that this guy reminds him of J.R. Smith sometimes. So I said, man, so you think the shot selection needs to improve? And he says sometimes, but he gets hot and it's tough to stop. He can pull up from anywhere. So we'll see how much he gets to see the floor early, because I think it's about defense for him more than anything, but not afraid to let it fly.
Yeah, and look, last year that was a weakness of this team. We talked about it a ton, the ability to create your own shots. So having a guy that can do that, even if some of the other stuff isn't there yet, is a plus. And this is a long season. There's going to be a game where you're down a couple guards. Maybe you're stuck in the mud a little bit, and this guy comes in and starts draining threes and get microwave hot, and he gives you a key conference game. That's something that we've seen happen before in college basketball. So I think the skill set that he has is going to help you a lot. And again, we were talking about the shooting as a team. Johnson Arrigo, we talked about him shooting threes effortlessly in practice in a way that kind of caught my attention. Schwartz is a deep three-point shooter. He can make him deep. So there's really not a lot of guys that you want to leave open on this team, except for Lynn Kidd, who's going to be right there posted up and drawing attention inside, which is only going to make the three-point shooting better outside of him. So another three-point shooter and someone with some more creativity, which is an area that Miami lacked last year.
And then the last guy here that I was probably about as impressed with his game as anyone I saw out there at the exhibition, Divine Ugochukwu from the Houston area, late signing for this Miami staff. Really a great find. They've between Keyshawn George a couple years ago now, and then Divine Ugochukwu. Obviously, Keyshawn ended up being a first-round pick and is already showing something. So Divine still has some work to do to live up to that. But these late signings have been really good finds, it seems like, from this staff. Guy who's about 6'2", 6'3", long. For a freshman, has some good strength to him, can defend. And I was really impressed with his ability to put it on the floor and distribute and get into the paint fearlessly, and then have 2 or 3 bodies around him and not really panic and find the wide open guy. But I think he's someone, Coach L said the other day, when we signed him, the plan pretty much was he's going to be a redshirt. And that a month ago, they told him, you're not redshirting. You can help this team this season. So I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah, Ugochukwu, that's the name I want to, that's the guy I'm laser focused on here when we go to the game tonight. And just in general, he was way more than I expected watching the exhibition. Size-wise, he looked great for a point guard. I mean, he looked like an NBA point guard body-wise. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like he looked like he could be a shooting guard at the college level without a problem. But of course, once you see him play, he was getting in the paint. He was making the smart plays. He was really confident with his distribution. Very good player in the Houston area last year. So he's an accomplished high school player with his team, not just AU superstar. You know, this is a guy who's played the game in a winning fashion at the high school level. But man, he really, really caught my attention with some of the passes he made and the poise he played with. Exhibition game, the competition is not there, but he did not look sped up. He did not look passive. His pace was very, very good, which is what you want in a point guard. Confident, but not sped up. So we'll see how it goes. I'm curious to see how the shot goes. He had some free throws that looked a little funky. It's hard to say with a freshman, what kind of shooter they are. That's going to be something to watch. But the finishing looked good. The size looked good. The athleticism looked good. And really, how many guards have we talked about already? Is he the only true point guard you'd say on the roster? I think he probably is.
Yeah,
right?
because Pack and Blackman are combo guards. I think Bethea probably same thing, and probably will have to play more of the one as he gets to the next level. But yeah, I don't see anyone as just a pure distributor and defender like he is.
Different type of player than Charlie Moore, and of course Charlie Moore when we had him was his 5th year, whereas Divine is a true freshman, so it's not the impact's not
6th year actually.
There you go. So it's not the impact's not going to be the same, at least right now. But that was the last time we really had a true point guard. And I think Divine, different body type, freshman, he's not going to be Charlie Moore day one. But it's interesting to see what this offense looks like when you have a guy that can be a true table setter, and he's not to think about, hey, am I going to be trying to get myself going? Pack's got a lot on his plate. Sometimes we need him to score. Sometimes he needs to distribute. He's got a very hard role, especially now that he's got to balance with Blackman and some of these other guys. I think Divine, as someone you could develop and be part of this program for a long time, if he's your floor general as a junior, senior, maybe sophomore, maybe next year, now you can get guys around him and know that he is the one that's going to be the quarterback, your Jim Larinaga coach on the floor. I don't want to get too hyped up over just one exhibition game. But based on what we heard about camp, you mentioned the Larinaga quote, based on what we heard from the Texas area when he committed, some of the people saying, hey, keep an eye on this guy. This guy's a real deal dude. And then seeing how he looked when we saw him on the floor at the SCO, Jack McClinton was talking him up. I'm very, very excited about this player. He was not on my radar at all as someone that'd help us this year. But seeing him in person, we need a guy like this.
So, D, now that we've gone through the roster, let's kind of wrap things up here by looking at some of the projections in terms of the ACC, where you see this team fitting in and, near the end of the season, and then taking a look at how the schedule kind of shakes out. I've seen Miami predicted a lot in that 5 to 7 range. I've seen 6 a lot. as well. Obviously, Duke and Carolina, people expect them to be up near the top of the conference. I was talking to someone who's very plugged in at Carolina the other day, and I think there is still some skepticism of Hubert Davis. Obviously, they made that run a couple years ago, but not a great year for them last year. Wake Forest, a lot of high expectations for them this year. Clemson as well. Virginia, I've seen them projected over Miami, but I think with this Tony Bennett stuff, there could be a bit of a shakeup there. But Miami as 6th, I think that's a pretty solid projection at this point.
And look, this is a new team, right? So
yeah,
it's so hard to project. I would say things that can have us go in different directions. Number 1, 2, and 3, the defense, how this team can come together on the defensive end. So I do think they're going to be able to score. How's the defense going to come together? Who's going to step up? Who's going to play above maybe what they played in the past, if at all? That's something to watch. And then Jaleel Bethea, kind of your X factor. How much are you getting off of him? He is one of the most, we just from the first couple plays, he's one of the most talented players in the entire conference, if not the entire country. He's talking about top 10 pick potentially in the draft, one and done. Those guys aren't on every single team. So how much can you get out of him? How is he going to fit with the other players? What is his impact going to be? Because he could be that difference making type of guy year one. But look, kid, he's not, doesn't have to adjust ACC competition. All the numbers we talked about were ACC numbers. Nigel Pack, Final Four, we know what he can do. Jalen Blackman, smaller school, but he went to the tournament and is a proven player. So, he's maybe there's some adjustment to the ACC, but he's someone who knows what he's doing on the basketball court. Matthew Cleveland, productive player his entire career in the ACC. Brandon Johnson, veteran, he's stepping up in competition, but he's played against good teams. So I don't think this team's going to carry themselves like an underdog necessarily. I think they're going to come in with a lot of confidence because these guys are all veterans who played a lot. It's really going to be about what Bethea can do to elevate the team with his talent level, and how all these guys who played very big offensive roles for the most part can hone in on their defensive impact and fit in with each other.
Now, looking at the way the schedule shakes out here, D, obviously Fairleigh Dickinson tonight in the season opener. So that's Monday as we record this. But they have Fairleigh Dickinson there, Binghamton next Sunday, and then Coppin State the week after that. And then you're going to be playing in a tournament. You have Drake on Thursday, November 21st. And Drake, remember, this is a team who was a 10 seed last year. They were the 12 seed in the NCAA tournament a couple years ago when Miami made their Final Four run. Had Miami down late in that game, and Drake came back and won. So expect them to be in the mix for another tournament berth this year. But that'll be your first real test of the season there. And then you come back home. You have Charleston Southern. After that, this is where it gets fun, man. A really, really cool stretch here. You have a week run here starting Tuesday, December 3rd, where you have Arkansas in the ACC SEC Challenge at home here. So that should be the first real, packed house of the season at the Watsco. And obviously John Calipari, first season at Kentucky, at Arkansas, coming from Kentucky, had Miami's number big time last year. But after that, you have your first ACC game of the year in Clemson, which always weird, have one of these early December ACC games. And then you go to Madison Square Garden for the Jimmy V Classic, and you play against number 12 Arkansas. So number 12 Tennessee, excuse me. So in the span of a week, you have Arkansas at home, Clemson at home, and then you go up to the Mecca, the greatest place to play basketball in the world, Madison Square Garden, and you have Tennessee. So you're going to find out about this team pretty early on, D.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you look at last year, they really did get off to a pretty good start. It was that Colorado game was pretty sobering. Of course, Kentucky, that felt like a clash of the blue bloods when it happened. Obviously, we saw how the season turned out. But that team last year took care of business with some of these teams. Now, the other side of it is we've seen some great Miami teams that have made runs who have given away some of these early games against these smaller schools. I want to say 2000, the year that we won the ACC tournament and the regular season, I think we lost to St. Leo that year. I want to say the team that Miami just played. I might be wrong on that, but I do believe in 2013, Miami took a couple tough losses early, and then of course coalesced and became a team that dominated the ACC in a way that no Miami team has ever done. So grain of salt, you just want to see how the team develops heading into ACC play. But it'll be interesting to see. I think one thing to watch with these smaller school teams is how they handle Lynn Kidd, because I don't think there's guys with that skill level and size in most of these conferences. So is Lynn Kidd going to be able to get off to a really good start? Are we going to be able to get, feed him and get the rhythm playing around a big man like that, which Pack has not done, certainly in his Miami career. Have a guy like Lynn Kidd. Can we figure out how that part of the offense works here, playing against teams that just probably don't have the depth of size that you'll see in the ACC?
And they play in this tournament. It's in 17 days, November 21st. Drake is the first game of the tournament. That's a Charleston Classic. So you have schools like FAU, Nevada, Oklahoma State, Go Pokes, Seton Hall, Vanderbilt, and VCU. So you see Miami won a tournament last year. It didn't amount to much. They beat Kansas State down there in the championship game in, was it Atlantis that it was? It was in the Bahamas. So obviously didn't mean much for the season moving forward, but I thought that they were on the way to a great year after I saw them early on there. But yeah, so that'll be just in a few weeks here. So again, they'll be tested early. These first few games should be able to kind of figure out who's got what a little bit and get these rotations right for those games. And I'm sure there's going to be constant adjustment. But yeah, it was really a shocking season last year. I think the injuries have to go into that, but the depth just wasn't there. They could not handle guys missing, and I think this roster should be way more equipped in these situations.
Yeah, and look, it's the disease of more, right? You heard about Pat Riley. When you have success, you bring guys in, people want more. A guy like Rugo wants a bigger role, right? Norchad's doing things that maybe he didn't do last year. So you lose all that because it's great to have the confidence of having a deep run like that, but in the NIL era, there's negatives that come with it too. Especially when you lose a Wong, you lose a Jordan Miller, and different guys want different parts of the pie. This is a team where everybody's sort of starting fresh. They all have something to prove. Nobody feels entitled to anything, I don't think. We'll see. And it's going to be a team that develops. And yeah, just going back and looking at that 12-13 team, which again, for my money was, even without the Final Four run or the Elite Eight run, I think that 12-13 team was the best team we ever had. And they lost to St. Leo Exhibition. They lost to Florida Gulf Coast during the season, lost to Indiana State, lost to Arizona, and then went in the ACC and just completely destroyed everybody. And went on a huge winning streak, of course, culminating in the tournament, ACC tournament win. So
it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for this team to gel. You're not going to see the best version of them early, but if they can be firing on all cylinders going into ACC play, I mean, January 1st, obviously you have Clemson here in early December, but then January 1st you play at Boston College. That'll be when things kick off, because then you go into the 2 to 3 ACC games a week, and that's when the grind starts. But you always set yourself up if you can snag a tournament win there early. If you can beat an Arkansas at home, and that game will be hyped up. If you can knock off one of Arkansas and Tennessee, and then take care of a Clemson team at home that is projected top 4 or 5 in the ACC this year, you're off to a great start if you're Coach L, right? So I think at that point the team would be ranked top 25 because they're just outside of the top 25 right now. And this stuff matters for getting ready for seeding purposes and things of that nature. So again, a lot that needs to come together still, but Coach L is the OG of the transfer portal. People forget before the portal was cool, he had guys here redshirting for a year and coming out the next season and making an impact. It's different getting them here right away and having to assimilate them immediately. But if anyone can do it, it's this guy.
Yeah, excited to see. Anybody sees us there today at the SCO, say what's up. We'll be around, and we'll be
doing a post game. Yeah,
we'll do a post game. We're doing a wall-to-wall coverage here of Miami Hurricanes basketball throughout the season, throughout the non-conference, throughout ACC play, and hopefully beyond into postseason play. It's going to be a really fun season. Excited to see these guys, and as always, go Canes.
Go Canes.
This an insight to the Canes, and you know we ain't playing no games. Joaquin said dominate, so that's what we do. Home of the legends and 7th floor crew, down in Miami where hurricanes brew. You here for the rumors, we